Hello, everybody. We're ready to start. My name is Denise Cox, Senior Content and Communication Specialist here at Poppulo. In today's webinar, Gregg Apirian and Mike Lepis from Vignette, the Employee Experience Agency, will take us through the steps of developing and implementing a strategy that places internal communications central to driving business goals. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping items. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So type them as we go along in the questions area on the left-hand side panel. As always, the webinar is being recorded, and we will make it available to you after the event. Also, you will have the slides. My colleague Kevin Ivers is live tweeting today's webinar. If you'd like to join the conversation, it's hashtag ICMatters, hashtag ICStrategy. I'd like to tell you that you can book your place now at our next webinar on Tuesday, December 19th. Our guest, Laura Barber, Formica, European Engagement Manager, will be presenting a fascinating case study you won't want to miss, how her organization met the challenge of reaching a non-desk, non-digital workforce. You can register by entering your email address on the screen now. Okay, before I hand this webinar over to Gregg and Mike, first I'd like to talk to you about Poppulo. We are a #1 provider of internal communication software with many offices in Ireland, the US, and the UK. We are a trusted partner to many of the world's leading organizations such as Nestle's, Walgreens, Honda, Rolls-Royce, and Unilever. The Poppulo platform includes our market-leading email tools, events management, unrivaled IC-specific measurement and analytics, as well as consultancy services. Everything you need to elevate the impact of internal communications in your organization. Our solutions provide organizations with the ability to transform communications with employees by enabling communicators to plan, manage, publish content, and measure impact across primary digital channels, all in one central location. We pride ourselves in providing these solutions that enable communicators to become trusted advisors within their business. Poppulo not only provides the software for this, we also provide the services and support to help you elevate IC to the heart of your organization. So without further ado, I hand this over to you, Gregg and Mike.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you to everyone who downloaded the white paper and who is here listening this morning. My name is Gregg Apirian. I'm the Managing Director of Vignette, and I am very excited to co-present with my partner, Mike, who I'll let introduce himself real quick.
Hi, I'm Mike Lepis. I'm Creative Director and co-founder of Vignette, and very excited to be here. Strategy is really important in developing internal communications with impact, and we really hope you get a lot out of this webinar. We had a lot of fun putting it together and co-authoring the white paper with Poppulo, so looking forward to getting rolling today.
So we're going to move at a quick pace and try to keep it to a pace that you'll follow. So getting started here, we have seen many companies, large and small, in this space operating for far too long without an internal communication strategy, and Poppulo has as well too. So that's why we put our expertise together here to try and change that in the marketplace, and we're very passionate about that. And a long time ago, Ben Franklin once said, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And I think a lot of internal communication practitioners out there aren't realizing that without a real strategy, that is what you're actually doing. So we are going to provide a very simple framework here for you to follow to create a strategy. And most of you likely are operating with tactics first, and this is really the #1 mistake, because if your strategy is not aligned to your business strategy, then your tactics may or may not really be working or driving the type of activation or engagement you're looking for. So ultimately, the starting place here is really to look at things a little bit differently. We know many experts out there operating as internal communication practitioners or in the form of HR. Look at people. We use these words like human capital and people are our best assets, and that's like saying people are the same value to me as this desk or this chair, and that's not the way the world works. People are human beings, and all of us seek experiences, and experiences trigger emotions, and that's what we're all trying to really do. the same way that marketers have done this for customers or consumers. So as we look to really try to make this simple for you to understand, we created what we called 4 pillars to success. And if you follow each one of these, you will come out of this with a strategy. And once you have a strategy, there's no guarantee that it's meant to work. Once you put it out there, that's where the learning that comes along with all of this helps you understand and optimize that strategy to get it right. And all of us have that opportunity. So the first pillar that we're going to go into here is called vision. It's really about having a vision, right? If you don't have a vision of what you want things to be like, that's where it's got to start. So why does internal communications need a vision? Well, I think the number one problem all of us are dealing with out there in most organizations is leadership, especially the C office, is not really driving this. They're not supporting it the way you need to. You don't have the budgets that you need to. And if they're not doing that already for you, they're not going to do that anytime soon. So this gives you the opportunity to become this leader and to come up with a plan that will get them on board to support you and to participate in it, because that is key. So how can you do this? Well, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, how can internal communications add value to your business? And if you look to your business strategy, there is likely the answer right there, because the whole point of a business strategy is to deliver for your customers and create this market for yourselves. But the whole point of a communication strategy is to align your employees to it so that they can realize that business strategy. So you've got an opportunity to think really big, and most of us who haven't had tons of resources to do lots in this space just yet, if you look over to what marketers are doing and taking a good look at how consumers are being activated or engaged or even just familiar with brands and engaging with brands, that is a North Star for you. And if you really think about the type of materials you can create, all of us love movies, and look at just for a second here of the passion and the creativity that goes into a movie poster. And you can do the same thing for internal communications by creating posters that use original photography instead of stock photography, and that use design systems and branding and language that strikes the same emotions in people. The same goes with, if your company has a cutting edge e-commerce website for your customers to use, well, then you should have a cutting-edge intranet instead of all the things that we generally hear about, that the internet is, not designed right, and I can't find this, I can't find that. It's really about having this vision for things being better, and looking to the consumerization of internal communications is a great first step as that North Star for yourself. And when you look to your vision, some of us find it very easy to just say, this is what I want for my organization. And others struggle with that. And the idea of the North Star is to find something that inspires you. So when you're looking to create this vision, these are a few elements you want to sort of check off to understand. And you'll find that in your visioning, you might not be there in understanding these things. So you've got to then go figure out how to understand these things. The first one would be understand your audience, an age-old lesson in marketing. And nowadays, most of us sending one message to our entire audience is not going to work, because people are different and they have different behaviors or different traits. So we need to understand those to be able to serve up the right type of content that matches their preferences. And with that, when you align your business goals to your communication goals, then you're communicating with them about business in the right way, and you need all the resources from people to technology to capital to do this. And you've got to be measuring it. There's just too many of us not measuring anything in this space, and you just need to understand what effectiveness looks like to be able to sort of course correct that. So in your vision, you want to be able to look at all of these and check these off. So as a wrap up for just having a vision, right, like find a North Star. And find some people in your organization, whether they're on your team or in other departments that you collaborate with, to sort of break down the silos in these corporate structures to be able to align around that vision. Because when you've got a vision and you've got other people who believe in that vision that are participating, it shows the legitimacy across the organization. It makes leaders really pay attention a lot more, and it sets you up to have the right people to help you execute that as well.
Great. Thanks, Greg, for setting that up here. So let's talk about alignment. We call this the secret to success. So Follow the steps in the first part here. You've established your vision. Great. This big thinking is half the battle. Now you really need support because success does not happen in a vacuum. And support for your IC vision is dependent on support from across the organization. Now, your goal with alignment is to assemble a team of invested peers and leaders so you can get enthusiastic support from senior leadership. And if you did have leadership support, you probably wouldn't be here. But it's our hope that you'll be able to win over and transform your organization with this approach. Now, one note, we like to say, and we like to encourage our clients around this as well, is organizations are getting flatter. There is a lot less of a hierarchy. Leaders and innovators are much more, leaders, innovators, and influencers are much more accessible. You really need to take advantage of this to make sure your strategy is integrated across the organization. And so when we look across, it's easy to say, oh, I have leadership support, or I have support from from a couple of key people, but we really look at alignment as across the entire organization. And so when you look at these different roles here, which we call stakeholders, as a group we refer to them as stakeholders, and then there's many across the organization. You can't really just say, oh, leadership's bought in, so we can move forward, but you really need alignment across the whole entire organization. We're going to go through why that's important for each one of these groups. And we'll start with the second group here, which we refer to as key stakeholders. And these are the ones with direct impact and influence, and sometimes referred to as an executive committee, usually made up in our space of leaders from HR, communications, and marketing, and probably have a representative from executive leadership as well. They're assigned to sponsor and support the vision and help the C office see it. And then leadership itself, the C-suite, who's responsible, core responsibility is guiding the vision of the company and the performance of the company. And you need to understand that because you really want to tie the employee experience and internal communications to the company's success. So how do you get them to align around this? You need to show them the impact to the business, how an effective strategy is going to positively affect turnover, productivity, customer satisfaction, and this all can be tied to an improved employee experience. And then if we move down here to the third spot, we talk about people leaders, anybody with direct reports. And now we're moving down the line here. We're not just trying to get alignment across the top of the organization. But so people leaders, anybody with direct reports, frontline managers, those with responsibilities to a team of people. Very important to have alignment with those within the organization. And why is this? Well, they're vital because they're constantly having one-on-one interactions with employees, and they really require clarity and support in communicating with them. And when they're unclear what the message is, the direction, it makes their job so much harder. The next stakeholder here are what we refer to as generally headquarters employees. And these are the ones closest to central operations, most likely desk employees, and they have a deep connection to the culture of the organization. And so why is it important to get alignment from them? Well, with their proximity to leadership and the core functions of the business, they have a unique perspective and influence within the company. Their alignment to your vision helps improve your strategy. And then moving down one more, frontline employees. These are the customer-facing, the mobile, the remote, any non-desk people within your organization. They have a unique set of needs that when it comes to employee communications. And why is it important to get alignment from them? Well, they're the personification of your brand to the customers. They're trusted to represent the company and the brand in both actions and words. And they have a reality that's just much different than HQ employees. And then lastly, job seekers. And these are the ones that are looking at the company as a potential employer, and you're probably asking yourself, well, how do I get input from them? Well, we look at this as talking to recent hires, about their experience. They're going to have the freshest recollection of their impression of the company, of the employer brand, of the entire journey from candidate to employee. So it's really important to have them have them aligned to the vision as well. So now you have this alignment, you have your vision, you have alignment, and now you need to present this. And so this isn't a webinar on presentation skills, but if you haven't increased your skill set in that area and your comfort in presenting, it's really important because most likely if you're developing a strategy and you're going to be presenting it within your organization, you're going to be the one. It's going to come best from your voice. So present with confidence. And definitely you must use data and insights where possible, especially when talking to the C-suite within your organization, that we need to have tangible evidence as to why, why this is the direction, why we are supporting this vision, and how we have support across the entire organization to make this happen. And the other thing, that seems kind of obvious is, be ready for feedback and be ready to evolve your mission over time, because you're using it as a starting point, but we don't want to dilute it, but we want to make sure that it's relevant across the entire organization. And so you need to be open to to make adjustments and refinements to your vision as you get practical input across the organization. And then, getting real. I mean, let's be honest. Every organization is different here, and really, if IC has been floating along as a tactical group that's just been executing communications, you're probably going to be challenging the norm a little bit. So you have to ask yourself if you're okay with that. Is IC respected within your culture? Is it a strong component and consideration with leadership and the direction of the organization? You need to be strong and you need to be confident. You need to prove them wrong if you're kind of swimming against the current there. Any form of change is difficult, small or big. It requires a change management plan. And so don't just make suggestions for a big change. Include how that change will happen and by when. And nobody likes change, including leaders. And so without a full strategy, you can't have a full change management plan. And so our recommendation is working on a change management assessment plan in parallel to your IC plan if there's going to be major changes across your organization. So you got to be prepared to know how much you're envisioning this is going to impact the organization. And, ask yourself, what's your organization's capacity for change? Some organizations are, big and nimble. I mean, size has nothing to do with being nimble or innovative. Some take additional time. So, be honest and, know who you are. Lastly, be honest, be honest about your capabilities and your capacity for your teams. For example, don't promise virtual reality when what you really need to do is develop your employer brand or, update an email template. So just be realistic around those areas. So, in summing up here, don't work on an island. Your vision is as good as the team who supports it. So again, as we talked about stakeholders across the organization, make sure they're all aligned and they're all supportive and you're getting their input and their perspective. Secondly, speak the language of shareholders, of stakeholders. Make sure that they embrace the opportunity, that they understand in ways that are meaningful to them. And lastly, don't get discouraged. We really try to encourage our clients and other people that we speak to. We do hear some people that are that find challenges, very big in their experience here. So, it requires leadership, requires tenacity and planning. Dig in and really, if you're passionate with your vision and you have support across the organization, you're going to get by.
So at this point in time, right, many of you are saying to yourself, well, I have or I don't have a vision, and I have alignment with some of the right people or all, or I have no alignment, I have to go get it. But those who are pretty much at the place where I've kind of got that alignment, so I might as well just get started and go here, we beg you, stop. You are not ready for tactics yet. Tactics really come after you have a strategy, and we're a few steps away from that. So the thing to really consider now is research and insights. Up to now, you probably have this vision that you've done, in a vacuum with just a few people. And ultimately, most internal communication practitioners nowadays, there is a skills gap out there, right, compared to marketers. How many of you are, see yourselves as content creators and marketers nowadays? Because essentially that's what you're at. And all marketers are doing research and using analytics to even predict, what their customers want or need. And you've got the same opportunity here. So we're not saying you have to go that far, but we are saying take a step into the research area so that you can build this irrefutable case to leadership and to others to help support you. So the first thing that you really want to understand here, right, that you're looking for in research is kind of a current state audit. What are we operating like now? You have to have a future state vision, which we talked about already, which is your North Star of where you want to get to. And your work is really in between there. There are probably many gaps to solve for across many categories. So the first thing you really want to understand is your employee audience, because like I said earlier, they're not all the same anymore. And if you dig deep enough, you're going to find these powerful insights that are going to tell you how to take action on that. And I think just an important pause here is Mike and I speak publicly a lot, and when we're in a room of at least, 100 plus people, we always say, how many of you have data? And everybody's hands goes up. How many of you know how to extract insights out of that data? And about 2/3 of the hands go down. And how many of you know how to take action on those insights? And all the hands go down, which tells us, there's a skills gap there, right? So everybody's got data, and finding insights, is fairly easy if you are trained to know how to look for that. And creating the action plans is really the job of a strategist there. And you might be that, or if you're not, you can find someone to do that. But by doing it this way, you're ultimately going to get to this place of really confirming what people want versus what you think they want. So we've created these sort of 6 filters for you to think about in your current state audit to really understand where you're at right now and where you could potentially go. The first one is brand. Most companies that we see nowadays do not have a fully documented or even any form of an employer brand. And just to take a pause here, an employer brand is probably one of the most critical tools that you'll need to accomplish your strategy. So, for easy definition's sake, most of you, if not all of you, your company has a brand. And that brand is out in the marketplace, targeted at your customers or your consumers, however you look at that. And it's basically establishing a perception of your products and services in the marketplace. Your employer brand is very different. Your employer brand needs to be designed to help your employees see why it's so great to work for your company. And by doing this, right, you can take a look at the brand and translate that for internal use by looking at the essence of it in the form of the brand's personality and your core values at the company and the emotional rewards and functional benefits that an employee gets out of that. And when you begin to think about how to translate that at this stage, that's all you're really doing. You're not making the employer brand as much as just thinking of what that translation feels like going from a consumer-centric brand or a customer-centric brand to an employee-centric brand. Your audience, again, is super key here. And while you might know things about your employees, the real core of what you need to know nowadays is really their preferences. What channels do they prefer? What vehicles do they prefer? Day parts is a simple definition of what time of day or time of week do you send these communications. For most of us, Mondays are hectic and Fridays we're already half checked out. Are those the best days to get an important email and take action on it, or is a Tuesday or a Thursday? So you would be guessing until you ask these questions and know, and what you're going to find is some people want it one way, some people want it another, and if your marketing group is serving your customers that way, you should be able to serve your employees that way. The other very important factor here are learning preferences. Just as human beings alone, many of us are very different. Are you a visual learner? Are you a tactile learner? Are you an auditory learner? Really the difference lies in, if your CEO sends a CEO email frequently that's 17 paragraphs long and your organization is mostly visual learners, you've lost everyone before they even got to sentence 2. Versus what you could solve there is a very short, sentence or 2 with a call to action that takes them to a video, right? And if it's an auditory thing, maybe it's a manager sitting down with them and meeting with them or a group of people. And if it's tactile, it's to print something. They want to hold it and touch it and feel it. So again, you've got to really understand the audience to be able to create targeted content for them nowadays. And that sort of rolls into culture. What is your culture like? Many of us have seen our businesses change and grow over the years based on the world changing, and culture has not changed with that. So for those companies where culture has changed, they've got a good handle on that, but many companies have lost that control because they haven't focused on it, and what's happening is their new business strategies colliding with how the company works. And if you're a company that has people outside the United States, your culture might even be different than you think it is. So you need to really be able to assess how should culture be the same or different, and will it be hard or not to align people around culture. And if your employer brand, if you bake your purpose and your values and all that into it, it helps fuel that culture and alignment. Capabilities, really important one here. All these things that you have a North Star vision of, is your team and yourself capable of understanding how to create and deliver and sustain that? In most cases, no. Your team needs to be augmented, whether through other people in the company, other full-time people you hire, consultants, freelancers, agencies, whatever you think that mix is, you've got to bring people in who have the right skills to accomplish this, and that's where your budget comes from. You're going to likely need tools and technology to create, publish, and measure all of this content and communications. And there are plenty of people out there who are skilled in this space. So for far too long, we have seen internal communication teams that serve thousands of employees, and there's only one or two people serving that. And you all know, without me having to say this, that that's not really all that possible. So you've got the capabilities and the capacity issue there that you have to turn around. Capacity, we just talked about, but ultimately, you've got to have the amount of people with the right skill set, and you've got to have the available time to work on this kind of stuff. So if you're in meetings all day long and you can't create content and publish content and study how that content is working or not with the audience, then you need more people to do that. And lastly, while this might be appropriate for some of you, if not many of you, those who have employees who speak more than one language and or have locations across the globe, whether few or many, this is a really important thing, because what the standard company or brand does out there is they'll create these communications because of their lack of resources in all English, and then they'll just translate that and push that out there. And in some cases that works, but really customizing these communications, if you were to ask all of your key people helping in different territories or regions of the world, they would probably want custom communications and to even segment their own audiences there to target communications. And of course, the more that you look at a more custom strategy, the more time it's going to take, the more people are going to have to work on it, the more it's going to cost. But it's a very important factor, because then one side of the house is getting what they need and the other is not, and that leads to disengaged employees. So now you've got these filters to understand your current state, and now you're going to go out there and you're going to validate all this by talking to people. And the trick here is to be as statistically significant as possible. So what that really means is, no matter what the size of your company is, if you can talk to at least a third of that company, you're in a really good spot. Because imagine having these insights come back and 3 people said something, and you go to your CEO when you've got 10,000 employees and you try to make change on 3 people said this, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you can say that 2,000 people of 6,000 people said this, they're listening. So really what you want to do is you want to be able to explore a future state and understand all these different people and groups and roles. So from leadership interviews, right? Talking to leaders about their current perception of what they want, need, and think that the employees want or need is really powerful. But it's even more powerful to first talk to the employees through surveys and interviews, because when you get to do that, you actually figure out why they feel the way that they do. So imagine sitting down with leaders and hearing leaders tell you what they think the company needs from this, and you know that it's wrong, and you've got this data set now to go back with and these insights to say, well, I just talked to 1,000 employees, and guess what? They feel the opposite. That works very powerfully with your leaders to change their mind and get them aligned to where you need to be. So what we're really recommending here is you could set up, groups of interviews with leaders. So imagine that you're talking to, 5 or so different groups, which are essentially different departments, and then your individual leaders, because you want your CEO and your CFO and et cetera. You want the C office individually, right? Because they will influence each other with decisions, and you want to be able to sort of get them one-on-one there. And then when you sit down with employees, you can do 2 things. You can take a subset, let's say 20 to 40 employees, and sit down and do a half-hour little survey that they take that could be anonymous, and then follow up with a 45-minute to hour-long interview. And by doing that, you uncover why they feel the way that they do. So, for example, let's say a survey says, do you want to be promoted? And it's a yes or no answer. Most people, if not all, are going to say yes. But if you interview them, you might find that, well, of course I want to be promoted, but I'm hiding from promotion because of X, Y, and Z. And when you find out what X, Y, and Z is, you probably, are too close to your business to have been looking for that, and that's a problem that can be resolved. So the power of doing these things together really gives you the why. And then to get to your statistical significance, you can just do an all-employee survey with the same type of questions to look at that. So all this knowledge turns into power, and these insights of the business, some come in the form of positive that you can sort of keep fueling, and others come in the form of issues that need correction. And all of this really, end of day, comes down to what your employees want and need, that are aligned to the business goals. You're not going to give them things that are silly requests, but you're going to look very hard at what they're asking for. And essentially, if they're just asking, communicate with me here instead of here, then that's an important thing for you to hear. And it removes all this guesswork. So now that you've got this information right, what do you do with all this? And what you really want to do, like Mike said earlier from an alignment, is you want to take it back to your stakeholder group and to your leaders. And number one, put this into a presentation form so you can summarize these key insights and align everyone to understand them. Then you want to discuss these insights, because some of you might find a handful and others might find many, many insights. And based on your capacity as a company, you can only handle so much. So being able to prioritize which ones are the most important and to use some form of a scoring or weighting system to do that is important. And by the time that you prioritize this, you have a really good grasp on the actions that you need to attack first and foremost. And what that does, it allows you to create a roadmap, whether it's solving this over 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. You don't want to look too far out because things change a lot. But ultimately, when you walk out of that presentation and that room with your leaders, the idea of the roadmap is to assign those people in the room. Who owns this one? Who owns this one? What's the timing? Is this going to get done in 6 weeks or 6 months? And we need to ensure that these things get done. So as a sum up here, research really is a tactic to validate your vision, but you will always find through research you're going to learn a little bit more that's going to prepare you for this next step of fueling the creation of your strategy. So we encourage you, don't skip research. Too many of you do, and it's really just too important to not do if you don't know what you need to know about your employees in the organization. And you need to seek to challenge assumptions, because sometimes people want to do things just because other companies are doing it, or it's just easy to do, or they fear, the budget or skills they might need to do something else. But you should really be focused on to do what's right at first, and then figure out how to sell in that plan and get that kind of budget and support that you need there. And there are many methods to research. These aren't the only ones, but generally interviews and surveys are simple and powerful. And many of you might say, we don't like surveys because our employees have survey fatigue, and we've seen too many times that that's not true. Survey fatigue comes from two reasons: creating bad questions that employees don't necessarily respect, and two, not following up on the actions that come out of this. And if you actually write the right questions and you hear them and you follow up with action, they will be happy to take a survey every day.
Great. So now you have almost everything that you need, but you need to start documenting to create your vision. So to take your vision, your organizational alignment, and your research come together to really come to life, at minimum, you want to start off with creating 2 tools that are going to give your strategy context and make everything specific to your organization. So the first is the audience profile, and the second is developing your employer brand. So your audience profile, why do we need to do this at a minimum? Well, it's simply put, if you think from a tactical standpoint, one message to all sometimes works, but doesn't always work. And in fact, we would say it's probably on it's the minority of the time that it actually works. So to really diversify your messaging and how you shape your employee experience, you need to understand your employees. If you haven't developed personas before, simply put, they're high-level behaviors and characteristics of your employees. They take the assumption out. They apply the learnings from your research and insights. And once you have this data, you could organize this into, we typically find 3 to 5 personas are typically manageable. Anything beyond that is very specific for a very diverse organization. But with this info, you can develop strategies that target each group with a relevant messaging using the appropriate channel. I mean, that's really it simply. And at a minimum, this objective information will help you define the reality of employee experience versus assumptions and projections. And you can go deeper with personas. We call this segmentation, where you create subgroups to go further definition and targeting wants and needs and preferences and nuance of subgroups within your organization. But no matter how deep you go, what really matters is that you start and continue to enhance your knowledge of your employee audience. And the second foundational tool here is the employer brand. And so when it comes to your employer brand, you either have one or you probably have one, and you either don't have one or you have one and you need to enhance it. So starting from your consumer-facing brand, You want to look at that and then begin to translate that for your internal audience. This is where you put into words the expectations of the employee to deliver on the purpose of your company and really how they fulfill the external brand promise. And you probably have some assumptions, around this. There's probably some consistent behaviors, but if you haven't documented this, it's really an important step for you to engage in. And so, while you're going through this, consider your internal brand architecture. Are you an organization that has a parent brand that includes several sub brands, like let's take for instance Microsoft. You would refer to Microsoft as a parent brand, and something like Xbox or Office, those would be sub brands or child brands. And so think about your organization and if sub-brands exist. And if they do, take time to recognize these sub-brands within the employee experience. And so you want to ensure that these communications are consistent and aligned to the overall employer brand that you're developing. So from this groundwork, you need to define your employee value proposition. And this is where you define the values for employees and the expectations that define the culture. You can expand on your employer value proposition and draft an employer brand narrative, which this clearly and concisely describes what the value the company offers employees beyond compensation. And this is written with in a tone of voice that is very employee-centric. So make sure you find find the specific tone that is employee-centric, that fits your brand and fits your culture. And one more thing about the employee value proposition, it plays a really important role in your recruiting efforts and helping to find and attract job seekers and candidates that want to work for your company. So don't forget about that consideration. The second part of the employer brand is a style guide. And then this is really important, and this is also a good opportunity for you to get creative with your employer brand so you can distinguish it from your consumer-facing brand. You can explore secondary color palettes, typography, photography, graphical elements, visual languages that work within your organization. And this should be fun and exciting. And you want to make every effort to make sure your style guide is employee-centric and be very mindful and choose images and messaging and styles that specifically resonate with employees. Again, different than consumers and clients. And you'll play off your brand culture to find the visual styles that help you connect. And also, using the power of design, you can drive excitement around the brand and communications. And lastly, about the style guide, it's great because it allows you to police the brand. And police may sound a little harsh, but there's with any brand and a brand standards, consistency is so important. So by documenting this in a style guide, you now have an objective tool that you can use, that other people can use to help expand the employer brand across the organization. So with these two foundational tools, you're really ready to dive into the framework of your IC strategy.
So like Mike just said, you got your vision, you've got alignment, you've done some research to validate all this, and now you've created this audience profile. You have the basic foundational tools of an employer brand, and at this point, you might not realize it, but you've got most of your strategy. Now you got to assemble it, like in documentation. And when I say you've got most of your strategy already, if you really just think back to it, now you understand your audience, so you have this basic segmentation, for lack of a better word, and by understanding that, right, we can actually now apply what channels and vehicles to those segments work best, so that starts to create this tactical plan for you. So the recommended framework here, which is not prescribed, it's just a framework for you to play with, is your strategy being documented in more of a PowerPoint keynote style, so there's less on a page than a deep Word document with a lot of narrative in it. Is you want to have an overview, which really talks about the intent and purpose of this, how this aligns to your business strategy and why you've created this strategy. Then you want to share some of the most important insights that came out across the brand, across the audience, across culture, these categories that we gave you as filters. And by sharing those insights, the rest of this will make sense to everyone else who reads it. You can display both the brand narrative or the EVP, as well as some of the style guide elements to show that the employer brand has been birthed or evolved. And you could put some basic information there about the audience profile. And what I should add to what Mike said about creating an audience profile, whether in the form of personas or a deeper segmentation, you can do it in so many different ways, and likely for different communications, you might switch the way you're doing it. And what I mean by that is sometimes Role-based segmentation makes sense. Sometimes generation-based, sometimes geography-based, sometimes all of the above and more. So you've got to consider, there's not just one way all the time. And with all of these insights that you've captured, it should lead the way to help guide you on what way to go. So your strategy isn't necessarily cemented in stone. It's a good tool for you to use as a foundation, but to pivot from. So if you've got this audience profile, then you can apply for a specific strategy what the best channels are to use per each segment and what the best vehicles are to use. And the difference there, the channel is the way that you reach someone. The vehicle is what they're consuming. It's that internet page or that video or that email or that poster. And once you actually know all this, what channels, then you're looking at your roadmap and saying, okay, now our roadmap are the action plan. So perhaps your roadmap says, we just created an employer brand, so now we need to communicate it to everyone and activate people around it. We want to tell a story around our history or heritage. We want to change our recruitment marketing strategies. Whatever your actions are, and they'll be different for everybody, that is really what your strategy is about. You're serving communications to try to either change behavior, create new habits, transform this. Your objective might be different, but that action is what you're focused on there. And with likely having more than one action, you really need a content calendar to manage all this. So you might have heard the term editorial calendar, content calendar. We mean the same thing. Essentially, you need to figure out the cadence of all these communications because some things like annual enrollment need a more aggressive strategy to actually get them to sign up in a certain time. So it's almost like a retail marketing methodology compared to changes in the organization. You need to communicate those changes. That's not as aggressive, so the cadence could be a little bit different. So you really just want to have a plan, right? Some document/deliverable that enables you to understand when things go out. And generally, most of you probably know through your work that when you send one communication, and even with a great call to action, most people do not activate on the first try. So you've got to keep trying, and you got to figure out, if I don't get them here, do I get them here? And then if I don't get them here, how do I get them here? So your calendar really will help you understand how frequently to publish, what the assumption is on when you'll activate them and when you change that messaging, and et cetera. Very important tool. Resources, probably the greatest tool that we've talked about here. So you've got to identify in your strategy what type of people with what type of skills you need. They might exist already. Some of them might need to be hired new. Again, some of them might be agencies, whatnot. You've got to understand the technology needs that you have. If you're just going to start measuring, you probably need a few technologies. If you're going to create reports, maybe some of that is through technology or manual. And the capital required here, let's just say, I'm sure if I could hear all of you answer this right now, you would all say you don't have enough budget to do a lot of this. And that's one of the core problems. So if you can change leadership's perspective and show value, you should be able to get close to what marketing has. We have seen some clients who have plenty of money in this space and others who don't, and everything in between. And the ones who have the right budget have built the right business case, have proved through data and insights that these things are working, and have leadership that has either been transformed or was driving it from the start. So I think the key here is that, assuming most of you don't have leadership that's driving it, you've got to bring in people who have done this before. And with that, now your strategy is almost complete here, and your change management assessment that Mike talked about earlier is a parallel path that's working here, but at least you have a summary of what that change management strategy is here. So, some of you might be saying, well, we might understand the kind of people we need, but we don't understand the kind of budget we need. And that kind of says to us, well, then you don't have the right person to help you understand the budget. So if you're planning to use people on the outside or agencies, you can't go to those agencies in today's world anymore and say, we don't know what this costs. You need to go at them to say, here's a framework of the budget that we have, and you need to help us understand if that's enough or not enough. And there's always, I promise you, most of the agencies of the world like us aren't looking to take all of your money. We're looking to help you achieve your goals. So we're just trying to find what that right mix of people, technology, and capital is, what level of change management might need to be required to equal success here. And then lastly, once you know all of the above here, you can now start applying that, your channels and your vehicles, what to measure and how to measure it. The other side of it, too, is really the type of people. So ideally, most of you probably have teams of people that are either come from HR or internal communications, some subset like that. There have been companies we have seen who have actually design groups and project managers and all this other stuff. But essentially, you're building this little agency for yourself, this professional services group. So while you don't necessarily have to have all of these resources, what we recommend is that you have a foundation of these resources, because some of these come in the form of, 2 roles for one person. But for example, you can't turn a writer into an SEO strategist, but you can, help a writer understand SEO best practices, right? So you still need an SEO specialist to help that person understand these things, but the writer can actually do a lot with that. And same with designers. Don't use a print designer on a website redesign or an intranet redesign, right? Just because they're a generalist designer. They have to have that capability. So between the foundation of having a strategist who may understand how to come up with these type of plans and associate KPIs and measurement plans to all that, then it's a combination of writers and designers and technologists who are building things. You've got content managers who are publishing these things and studying if they're effective or not. You've got project managers managing all of you. You might have a video team, a very small video team, where you have someone who can actually shoot video and edit, or they're 2 different roles. A content strategist to understand what content you're creating and why and how and what it should be, and et cetera. So this list is really just to help guide you on realizing the transformation from being an HR or internal communications practitioner to a content creator and a marketer. And at the end here, while the white paper includes a section post this strategy on how to actually now implement this strategy and get tactical, this is where we say, now you're ready for this. We don't have the time today here on this webinar to go into the short tactical component, so you can either download this presentation afterward, where there's some slides in here that summarize what's in the white paper, or you can read the white paper there. But ultimately, we hope we've helped you think about how to create a framework, and all the details that go into it are going to come from each and every one of you when you dig and find this information. So we thank you very much for your time here today, and would love to open it up to some questions.
Well, thank you, guys. We've got a lot of questions, and I'm just going to take us to this slide here. I just want to take a moment before we go to the questions. If anyone attending would like to see how Poppulo can help you implement and help drive your IC strategy, following some of these tips that Gregg and Mike have taken us through, join us for a short group product showcase webinar. That's Wednesday, December 6th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. You can enter your email address in there now. I'm going to start with the questions. Gregg and Mike have both graciously said to share these slides with you. We've had a lot of people asking for that, so you've obviously touched a lot of nerves there. Questions are pouring in, so I'm going to get right to that while people are putting in their email addresses there. This is great. 2 questions on the framework items. First, what is the difference between channels and vehicles? Second, can you provide an example or categories for a content calendar?
Sure, I'll take a shot at this, Mike. I think I had said a few minutes ago the definition, but I'll say it again. I think terminology needs to standardize out there, but most people we interact with use these same terms. So a channel would be how you reach someone. So maybe your channel's digital, in person, and as 2 examples there, right? So in digital, the vehicle could be so many things. It could be a website. It could be a display ad on the homepage of your intranet. It could be the intranet. It could be the video that's on a page on the intranet. It could be all of the above. So the vehicle is what they're consuming, and the channel is the way that you're reaching them. So, for example, a lot of you probably have an intranet. It's an age-old story we hear that has not been modernly redesigned and has its issues, right? But if that's an existing channel for you and it has those issues and you're aware of it and you keep using it because it's there versus people saying, I don't want it, I don't like to go there, it's not easy for me to find things, then that's not the right channel for you, nor the right vehicle, right? So the idea here is to understand what works and to make them all as cutting edge and modern as possible so that the employees feel like the same tools they get from brands as a consumer, they can get as an employee. And in terms of the follow-on there with, provide an example of categories for a content calendar, this is really a hard question to answer because it might be different for all of you. I think the categories are really based on the action. So, for example, let's say we got 3 actions. You have a campaign running about your employer brand and your purpose and your values. And you've got another campaign running about annual enrollment. Then you know that, for annual enrollment, if everybody has to sign up by, let's say, December 1st, that you're not starting that November 1st. You're starting that 6 months prior, right? So your categories are really for that track of action about the awareness factor, the new things that you're adding or changing, right? So the story that you're telling along the way become the categories. So you can ultimately, first, create that awareness, get them to internalize this, and then through the follow-on communications, begin to, create that action, change that behavior, make them care about this more than than they really do at this point. So I think it's a hard question to fully answer, but ultimately, it's really about how you tell that story over time.
Yeah,
I would.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to that because I think the content calendar is important, and Gregg gave a great answer there. But I would say to take it even a step back before you start thinking about your content calendar and think about your business calendar. We've seen clients before, working in IC where they're kind of operating in a vacuum and not understanding that there's ebbs and flows and rhythm to the business, where sometimes communicating and engaging with employees is not optimal during, these 3 weeks. It's a very, it's a crunch time for the business, or, it's earnings are coming in at the, at the end of the fiscal year. There are times in the business where when you think about, essentially hot spots, or points where you're not going to have people's attention, you want to work around that. You want to operate with full visibility of that and, across your organization. So I would start there, and then from there, as Gregg was saying, for campaigns, there's different phases to go through, but then there's also, depending, again, tying it to the strategy of your department and what you want to accomplish. Is employee recognition and engagement important? Are you tasked with delivering lots of operational content across the organization? You really need to build it. There's no one answer for it. You need to build it so it's customized to your organization. But you're right on in thinking of how do I categorize this, because not all communication is the same.
Obviously, you touched a nerve there because there were a number of questions along the same line. What we don't get to, I'm going to share all the questions with Gregg and Mike, and they can answer directly if you'd like to continue dialogue on that specific one. Should we, as communicators, change the narrative about calling everything a narrative?
I think that's a great question. This is Mike. I'm sensitive to language. Are we using the right words here? Do words get overused and they just lose their meaning after time? So when we refer to a narrative, we talk about that as a way to make it attainable and to make it understandable and relatable. So if there is a challenge with calling something a narrative, then I don't think the label is as important as the content itself. So if you're getting pushback of like, oh, why are we calling this a narrative? Well, maybe it's just that's the way that you've been presenting it. Us as communicators, we're very verbal, but maybe a narrative is not the right approach if you are trying to tell a story or to get to get alignment or engagement around that. So maybe it's a visual way for you to address it, or maybe it's you change that to an engagement or some sort of activation. So you're getting the same message across, but you're not essentially in air quotes here calling it a narrative. So I think that's that's something to it's hard to give a very very specific answer to that, but I would challenge you to just kind of think of different ways to approach it if it's not working the way that you want it to.
Yeah. Thinking about what you're saying, I thought it was very interesting what you were saying about survey fatigue and taking that back and kind of owning it on why that's happening. And a question here is, any tips to get high levels of participation on employee surveys? We have offered prize pools, several reminders, requests, and appealed to the employees' opportunities to improve sales material, and still only saw 15% participation of our audience.
Yeah, I think that, every organization's different, right? Some, even if you did it all right, just don't like surveys, don't like giving feedback. There are companies out there full of engineers in general, high in demand, really smart, do great things for companies, very introverted, don't like to do these type of things, don't like to tell stories, don't like to share stories. So I think that you got to really dissect, your audience, like we said, and understand them, because perhaps that you're doing all this and you're offering all this reward, but you're hearing what they're saying, but you're not following up with action. If you're not following up with action fast, then they think it's a waste of time to give you that feedback. So I would say that's generally the biggest problem that we see. But, marketing doesn't always work, I think is the message I'd send back here. And if it doesn't work, you try to find out why, and that's where data and insights are so important. But if you don't know, then you just try different tactics and you try to get it. So if surveys aren't working, maybe frequent, I guess I would say focus groups, right? Or other ways for them to provide feedback you should try instead of just surveys. And there's a lot of cool tools out there nowadays that have real-time survey capabilities. So perhaps once a day through these technologies, a screen pops up, and there's one single question that you get asked, and it's very quick to answer or choose from a multiple choice, and you're done. And if you do this in a pulse way frequently, and it's just one question instead of sitting down and doing 15 or 20 questions, it might just be how you're doing it versus what you're saying and offering.
Yeah,
I would.
Sorry, Mike,
I would just add really quick. Yeah, I would just add really quick to that. If you're getting a little bit of response back, and it's an important issue that you're trying to get insight on, you can. There's ways where you can share. What is the current. What's the current feedback? And I think that that's an option to motivate people to respond. Like, oh no, that's totally not right. They start to see the results that are coming back. I think if you're getting 15%, that's a pretty small set, of opinions. And so I think you can almost. I don't want to say guilt people, but you can motivate them into voting or into participating in the survey. I saw something else. I mean, the kind of the visual, response that, like the immediate response that you see back from polls gets people to respond, quicker. They're interested to see what other people are doing, what they're responding. So I would just, if it's not working with the current survey approach you're taking, I would just explore other approaches to motivate people, and through visualization, I think if incentives aren't working, how do you get people? How do you make it into a competition there? I mean, that's another thing we see a lot of, with big organizations. There's a lot of camaraderie, and there's a lot of friendly competition that could be used to your advantage in motivating people to participate.
We have time for a couple more questions. I've said this from the beginning and saying this now is I'm going to be providing these questions to them at the vignette there, to Gregg and Mike. They're going to answer them. We're going to put them into a blog so they'll be answered. Are you still optimistic about IC getting a seat at the top table? It seems we have been on the cusp of recognition for years, but I think we are as far away from true recognition as we ever were. What do you guys think?
I think if you look at companies, it is a great question. And I think Mike and I have the same answer, but we, how you get there is different. But if you look at a company like Airbnb, who years ago changed the title of their chief HR officer to the chief employee experience officer, and they're sitting at the table because they were welcomed by leadership in the beginning. Leadership wanted this for the company. They were thinking this before anyone was. They looked for this person. They hired them. So if your leadership, again, is not looking for this, that's all of our greatest struggle, why you don't have the seat. And I think that just knowing how many companies are operating without a strategy and without metrics and without measuring all this, right there, just ask yourself, why should you have a seat at the table if you're not operating like a CMO is? Pretty straightforward, right? So I think that to get a seat at the table, you have to prove to them that these things work and that spending has an ROI. And if you can do this, right, then you'll get that seat at the table. And if you can't, perhaps you're at the wrong company where leadership doesn't get this, and you have to ask yourself some questions. Is this where you're really meant to lead?
There's some questions that require some more complex answers. I'm going to save those for you guys. The final question here, and also just so you know, there's quite a few in here just saying, great presentation, that don't have a question. So thank you for that. They did excellent. You have indicated we use the employer brand language to inform IC. But what if the organization's language is difficult to understand, as in it's complicated?
That's a great
Mike, you want to take
challenge. Yeah, I think we deal, as Greg had mentioned, some of our clients are in the engineering, technology, healthcare realm, and there are some complicated concepts there when it comes to the language. And I think that is where, you bring in somebody who is a visual thinker, or you bring in somebody who is, going to approach this as a creative problem to solve. I think that's, if it's overly complex in language, then you need to find another way to address it. So, examples, visualizations, having, design systems that, allow you to communicate these concepts in a way that's accessible. We work with, clients who, are putting technology in satellites and spaceships, but they have people working in their facilities who are, technicians, that are need to understand these concepts. They're not engineers. It's almost from like manufacturing to high concept, engineering, and people need to be aligned, across that. So I think there's ways to look for, I don't want to call them shortcuts. I mean, there really are strategies to that it can approach it from a visual approach, you can approach it from a language approach, from an experience approach. But if you're having challenges yourself, coming across this, then I would definitely look to bring on a partner who's gonna see this from a different perspective, and help you come up with some solutions. Not impossible. I'll just say that. Nothing's impossible.
Gregg Apirian, Mike Lepis, Vignette, the Employee Experience Agency, thank you so much for preparing and presenting this excellent webinar. I want to remind attendees that we will be sending the slides, we will be sending a recording of the webinar, we will be sending a link to the white paper, and also we'll be following up the blog, and Gregg and Mike will answer the rest of the questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. We look forward to hearing from you.